I was around people who I'd never met, I'd never spoken to a day in my life with the exception of the people who'd interviewed me. And I just thought, is this weird? Or is this like what it's supposed to be? Hi, I'm Asia. Welcome to Bold Clarity. This is a space where we slow the noise, tell the truth, and make space for the person you're becoming. So I am so excited to be starting this journey of podcasting with you all. This is something that I have been really wanting to do, just to share the journey that I've been on and hopefully encourage you to do the same. So I know you might be wondering why and why now. I have been on a very long journey of figuring out who I am, who I want to be, and how to kind of bridge those two things. And so I've had a lot of experiences where who I am has been tested, and I've been stretched in ways that I honestly could never imagine. And so along the way, I have learned a lot about myself and just what it takes to grow as a person, and hope to share some information that inspires you to really hone in on your own growth journey and celebrate the process and not just the destination. So I hope that by listening, you can walk away with some really bold clarity about who you are and how you choose to show up in every single space that you walk in. So I'll start with just sharing a little bit about me and my journey, and hopefully give some insight onto how I got here today. So I previously worked in education and started that journey right after graduating college. And up until that point, I had kind of always been someone who people would say is a leader, and had a lot of formal and informal experiences where I got the opportunity to show up as a leader. And so walking into teaching after graduating college, that was an experience where, I was really pushed, and there were these kids who were looking up to me and who were walking into my classroom every single day to get something out of whatever experience we were having. And so throughout that time, and I taught for 7 years, I definitely kind of got to the surface of why who I am matters, and what influence means. And I was aware of how who I was could impact the people around us, but not quite in control of that process. And so fast forward to 7 years later, I ended up quitting my job as an interventionist at the time, and took a really big leap into real estate. And prior to quitting my job, I actually kind of dabbled a little bit into real estate for a few months before deciding, okay, I really need to go all in if this is something that I want to do. And so I took a very big, scary leap and decided that I was going to go all in. And I remember feeling excited and also terrified, and joining in with a team and sitting in day one of training and being like, oh gosh, did I do the right thing? And I remember so vividly, we spent time on day one talking about ourselves. And I sat there thinking, why are we talking about this? Why does who I am matter? Why does my mindset matter? Why is this something that in a professional setting, we are taking the time to really get into. It was weird and it was really uncomfortable. And I was around people who I'd never met, I'd never spoken to a day in my life, with the exception of the people who'd interviewed me. And I just thought, is this weird? Or is this like what it's supposed to be? And from that day on, I was pushed in ways that personally I'd never been pushed before. And so I think that was the first time that I really fully understood and grasped this idea that in a variety of settings, whether it's professional or showing up in a social situation, who you are is what you have, and that is a gift, and it matters. And so I realized that I had not really taken the time to really get clear on who is Asia. Up until that point, a lot of who I was defined by other people, and some of those definitions that people came up with were good, almost too good, to the point where I was like, that's not me. What? I don't do things like that. That's way above, right? And also the opposite, right? Where people define me in ways that were limiting to me. And so having this kind of fresh start and opportunity to really get to know myself, where I was in that moment, and then figure out, okay, who do you want to be? That was probably one of the most transformative moments of my life that I, to this day, just don't know where I would have ended up. And if I would have become this person that I can say is truly Asia. And so I want to spend some time just kind of talking through that first part of figuring out who you are. And so one of my coaches, who I really respect, talks a lot about, when it comes to goal setting, it's not really just about the goals that you set, right? We spend a lot of time talking about what we want to achieve. Really, the value is in, well, who are you going to become, or who do you need to become in order to achieve those things? And so a really big part of that process is, okay, well, where am I now? How am I showing up? What is my mindset like? What is my attitude like? And although this can, I'd say, proceed with caution with this, also ask the people around you that you like and that you trust and that you feel like do know you to a pretty high degree. Ask them, what are things that you notice about me, or some habits that you've picked up on, and taking the time to really survey yourself and start to notice, what are the types of things that I say? How do I talk about other people? How do I talk about myself? What makes me uncomfortable? When you start to ask yourself those questions, and even just get in the headspace of having a healthy curiosity about who you are, you will notice a lot. And it can be an overwhelming process for sure, because you'll notice things about yourself that are great, and you'll notice things about yourself that maybe you don't love, and maybe they're not exactly aligned to who you want to be. The gift in all of that is the clarity that comes from knowing exactly who you are. If you do not know who you are, it's impossible to figure out and actually get to who you want to be. And so during this process, it's important to give yourself grace and acknowledge that the process is also important, and honestly a privilege to really get to take a look at, well, where do I want to go, and how do I get there? And what are the things that I get the opportunity to work on? How could I show up differently? How could I, implement this new habit? And when you get to do that, you can kind of give yourself a guide for becoming the person that you want to be. So really, really important during that process of figuring out who you are to extend the same grace that you probably give to other people, to yourself, and to be patient and also respectful of the process. And when I say respectful, I mean it takes time and it's not something that you want to rush. And so understanding and accepting that it is a journey and you're not going to, just because you figured out yesterday who you are, tomorrow wake up the next day and all of a sudden just be this amazing, perfect version of yourself that you decided is what you want to be. It takes a lot of work, and along the way, you'll be tested and also stretched in a way that will really encourage your growth. And so I encourage everyone to really start that process. And maybe, you don't have as dramatic of a moment where you're sitting in a new professional setting and realizing, oh my gosh, who I am is important. Maybe it's just a conversation with a friend, or even just from listening to this, that you find value in really taking the time to figure out who you are. The next part of that, right, is, well, who do you want to be? And when you think about who you want to be, it's not just about titles or what you're going to do, right? You may have the goal that you want to start a nonprofit. That's awesome. What type of person do you need to be to start a nonprofit? When you ask yourself those questions, you will get clarity on what habits do I need, what type of people do I need to surround myself with, what kind of influences do I want to have, what kind of development needs to happen in me on a really personal level to be the person that can accomplish this goal. This is not something that, by the way, you sit down and you just spend a day on and then you've got all the answers. This is a process where you really want to make sure that you're getting as specific as possible in what you want to do and who you want to be. So for me personally, when I finally kind of asked myself some of these questions, I realized that a lot of who I wanted and needed to be to accomplish my goals required a different level of organization that honestly was really uncomfortable. And I can actually remember that back when I was a teacher, I shared with someone at the time, I thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I shared with someone like, yeah, I want to go to law school. And they said, what? You're not organized enough for that. And I honestly kind of took that on as part of my identity, that like, I'm just not an organized person, and that I'm really indecisive. And so I realized years later, if I want to become this influential, powerful, motivating person, that organization was a key part of that. And so I took the time to figure out, okay, how do I become a person that's organized? And it was a lot of trial and error. And, kind of talking to people who had some of those skills and traits that I wanted to have, and figuring out, well, what do you do? What do you do when you wake up in the morning? What are some of the habits that you've implemented? And trying a bunch and then figuring out a few that really worked for me and actually committing to them. So an example of some of those things for me in the morning, waking up and journaling just to set my intention for the day so that I know, hey, this is the type of day that I'm committing to having. Here's the type of attitude that I'm committing to having. That was a habit that honestly never in my life had I done. And it was something that really contributed to me becoming a person who walks around with intention and who's not as reactive. Another example, getting committed to my calendar and time blocking, which as a real estate agent, people talk about time blocking all the time and how it's so important for you to know exactly what you're going to do each day. Much easier said than done, right? And so I can make a calendar all day, but the task of sticking to it, that's personal growth. That's you rewiring yourself in your brain to say, all right, here's something that is important to me, important enough that I put it on my calendar. I'm going to actually do it. For that specifically, I remember reading the 4 agreements, and the first one is to be impeccable with your word. And I took that very personally, and to me, my calendar became a way that I was impeccable with my word. If it's on my calendar, I'm going to do it. I decided it was important enough, so there's some commitment around it. I'm going to have integrity with myself and ensure that I actually show up and do those things. And of course, life happens and maybe you rearrange things. And yet, at the end of the day, it's a way that you get to show up for yourself. And so it may not be organization for you. It may not be calendaring. It may not be journaling every morning. And the sentiment behind the process is the same, which is investigate on a specific level, what do I need to implement that is going to cause me to be the type of person that's going to achieve these goals that I have for myself. This also requires a high level of honesty and optimism, right? That you actually believing that you can accomplish these things and make the progress that you want to become the best version of yourself. And so, again, it's a process where you give grace and you show patience and love to yourself as you figure it out. And honestly, it's a process that you might go through multiple times in different areas of your life to really, just continue to evolve and grow and figure out exactly who you need to be. So as we wrap this first episode, I hope that everyone could walk away with some good tidbits of information to start this process of growth, specifically around figuring out who are you by asking yourself that question and taking survey of the habits and the mindset that you have right now, and then getting really clear on who do you want to become or need to become to achieve these goals that you may have yourself. And lastly, extending yourself a whole lot of grace and a whole lot of love during the process. The good news is this is not something that requires perfection. And you have all of the time that you need to really be intentional with this process, and you don't have to do it alone. You can utilize all of the resources around you, if it's a person, if it's a book, if it's this podcast, if it's a guide somewhere, to become or start the journey to becoming the person that you really want to be and that you are going to be proud of. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of Bold Clarity. I'm so grateful that you are here. If you heard something that you like or that inspired you, please don't forget to subscribe and connect with me on social media at Asia Pate on Instagram. Thanks.